In the cold, harsh winter of 1900, a remote speck of land in the North Atlantic became the setting for one of the greatest maritime mysteries of all time. This is the story of the Flannan Isles, a group of uninhabited Scottish islands, and the three men who vanished from their post without a trace. Our story begins on December 15th, 1900. The steamer Arctur was making its way from Philadelphia to Leith, battling the notoriously rough seas of the Outer Hebrides. As it passed the Flannan Isles, the crew noticed something strange. The powerful new lighthouse on Eilean Mor, the largest of the islands, was dark. This was highly unusual. The lighthouse was a critical beacon for ships navigating these treacherous waters, and its keepers were known for their diligence. The captain of the Arctur noted the anomaly in his log, but, due to the severe weather, was unable to stop and investigate. The Flannan Isles lighthouse had only been operational for a year. It was a marvel of modern engineering, designed to withstand the full fury of the Atlantic. Manning this isolated outpost were three keepers: Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur. A fourth keeper, Joseph Moore, was on rotation, taking his shore leave. Ducat and Marshall were seasoned veterans, while MacArthur was a tough, experienced seaman, though he was only a temporary replacement. They kept the light going in one of the toughest, most isolated places imaginable. Days went by, and the light on Eilean Mor remained unlit. Concerns grey but relentless storms prevented any attempts to reach the island. Finally, on December 26th, Boxing Day, the relief vessel Hesperus, carrying Joseph Moore, was able to make the journey. An unsettling quiet welcomed them as they neared the island. The usual signs of life were absent. There was no flag flying from the mast, and no one came down to the landing stage to welcome them. The supply boxers, which should have been prepared and waiting, were nowhere to be seen. Moore, feeling a growing sense of dread, was the first to go ashore. He blew the ship's whistle and fired a flare, but there was no response. He climbed the steep, winding path up the cliff face to the lighthouse compound. He found the main gate closed, and the door to the living quarters was also shut. He entered the silent building. Inside, the scene was both ordinary and deeply unsettling. The kitchen clock had stopped. The table was set for a meal that had never been eaten. A single chair was overturned, as if someone had jumped up in a hurry. The keepers' beds were unmade, and their oilskin waterproofs were missing, suggesting they had gone out into the storm. But one set of oilskins, belonging to Donald MacArthur, was still hanging on its hook. Why would one man venture out into a raging Atlantic gale without his protective gear? Moore searched the rest of the lighthouse, but there was no sign of his colleagues. Moore reported back to Captain Harvey, and they searched the island together. They scoured every inch of the small, rocky outcrop, but the three men were gone. The official logbook provided the only clues, and they were cryptic. The entries, written by Thomas Marshall, painted a picture of a terrifying storm. On December 12th, he wrote of severe winds, the likes of which he had never seen in 20 years. He noted that James Ducat had been very quiet, and that Donald MacArthur had been crying. This was particularly strange. MacArthur was a hardened sailor, not a man known for breaking down in tears, especially in front of his colleagues. The storm was apparently so violent that it had shaken the very foundations of the 150-foot-high lighthouse. The next day, December 13th, Marshall wrote that the storm was still raging. He mentioned that all three of them had been praying. Again, this was odd behavior for experienced lighthouse keepers who were accustomed to extreme weather. The final entry was on December 15th. Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all. After that, nothing. The log went silent, but the details didn't quite add up. Weather reports for the area showed that while the seas were rough, the storm described in the log didn't actually hit the islands until December 16th. The severe weather on the 12th and 13th seemed to have been localized entirely to Eilean Mor, or perhaps it was a fabrication. Why would Marshall lie in the official log? The investigation by the Northern Lighthouse Board, led by Superintendent Robert Muirhead, uncovered more strange evidence. He found significant damage at the western landing platform, high above the sea. A supply box had been smashed, its contents strewn about. Iron railings were bent and twisted out of shape, and a huge rock, weighing more than a ton, had been dislodged unmoved. This suggested the island had been hit by a wave of unimaginable power, a rogue wave that had swept over the cliffs. The keepers sadly lost their lives in an accident. On December 15th, during a weather break, Marshall and Ducat went down to the western landing to secure the equipment, fearing the approaching storm. When they didn't return, MacArthur, the third keeper, went to look for them. Perhaps a massive, unexpected wave surged up the cliff, sweeping all three men into the churning sea. This would explain why MacArthur left without his oilskins. He was likely in a panic, rushing to help his friends. It seems plausible, but it leaves many questions unanswered. Why would two experienced keepers venture down to the landing during such volatile conditions? It was against regulations for all three keepers to leave the lighthouse at the same time. And what about the crying and praying mentioned in the log? Seasoned men like them wouldn't be so easily terrified by a storm, no matter how severe. Over the years, the public's imagination has run wild with alternative theories. Some believe the men were abducted by foreign spies or pirates. Others suggest a more personal drama. Perhaps a fight broke out between the three of them. Maybe one keeper went mad, killed the other two, and then threw himself into the sea. This could explain the overturned chair and MacArthur's strange behavior. And then there are the more supernatural explanations. Local legends spoke of the Flannan Isles being a place of strange power, inhabited by spirits or little people. Some have suggested a sea serpent, a giant seabird, or even aliens were responsible for the keeper's disappearance. One chilling poem written by Wilfred Wilson Gibson in 1912 captures the mystery perfectly with its eerie refrain, "3 men dead." One of the most compelling modern theories involves the phenomenon of rogue waves. These giant waves can show up out of nowhere, towering high and super destructive. A rogue wave could have easily swept the men off the 90-foot cliffs of Alan Moore. Some think infrasound from the storm and cliffs created low-frequency sound waves. Infrasound can cause unease, fear, and even hallucinations, explaining logbook entries of crying. Perhaps this psychological distress drove the men to act irrationally, leading them to their doom. Despite all the investigations and theories, the fate of Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur remains a mystery. Their bodies were never recovered. They simply vanished from a lockdown island in the middle of the North Atlantic. The empty lighthouse, stopped clog, and an eaten meal tell the keepers' mysterious last moments. Their story shows the sea's power and mystery, still fascinating us over a century later. What do you think happened on that lonely rock in winter 1900? Share your thoughts. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more unsolved mysteries only here on Forgotten Clues.